Okay, welcome back. This is Wayne Madsen with the Wayne Madsen Report, the Sunday Roundup, and we're joined tonight by Don DeBar, and we're talking about our trip to Tripoli, Libya in October '09, where we were at the anniversary of the Libyan Revolution and the Green Book conference, and we had although we didn't have a chance to meet Gaddafi, we were probably as close to him as many people will ever get. I just wanted to mention also his son, Saif Gaddafi, who's been all over the television. He was sort of a social gadfly in Europe, counted amongst his friends Prince Andrew, Lord Mandelson, the former British business secretary, and Nathaniel Rothschild. So unlike Saddam Hussein's two sons, who were real, SOBs, Saif Gaddafi really ingratiated himself to what you would, I guess you'd call the elite of Europe. And I wonder if that's has any effect on sort of Europe has made noise, but they haven't really talked. I think there's a split. Talk is cheap, and then there's this Gaddafi's relationship with Berlusconi, which is another issue. Berlusconi's thought to have a lot of financial interest in Libya, and Gaddafi has interest in Italy. And there was even a report, and I don't know how true this is, but that Gaddafi may have even been in Berlusconi's estate and may have witnessed at least one of the Bunga parties. But be that as it may, I think we're dealing with a different kind of dictator in Gaddafi than we did with Saddam Hussein, and even with McCain calling him, likening him to Hitler. I don't think that's playing as well as it did with Saddam. What are your thoughts on just especially his son seems to have a lot of business contacts and social contacts in Europe?
Well, yeah, I mean, his son basically has a reputation that, I don't know, would be sort of like what we would have seen in college with a rich kid, So,
yeah.
He a playboy, a jet setter, whatever. Right. And although no accusations that I'm aware of him indulging in a way that Berlusconi does with the very young. But, right. In terms of a relationship with Italy, for example, generally, we didn't get to sample it, at least I didn't, but my understanding is that some of the best Italian food in the world is in Libya, and it goes back to the relationship between the two that goes back to the Roman Empire. I mean, when we were in our hotel in Tripoli, I was told that we were about 300 miles from Sicily across the Mediterranean. It's very close.
Right, I remember we would have done anything to get a ferry ride over there to have some of that Chianti.
Right. I remember that. That's right. Yeah. But the ties are historically have been very strong. There's a little Italy somewhere in Tripoli, I'm told, also, and in some other cities too. But the more important geopolitical aspect to it, and this may explain the maybe ambivalent positions being taken by various members of the EU, is that a large part of European oil, particularly in southern Europe, comes from Libya. And those are direct relationships right now. And there is a concern, I think a valid one, that a change in the leadership there under conditions like this, where you're essentially looking at the United States having a role, or perhaps a major role, in what comes next. The relationship to that oil will change in some people's minds, I think, with the U.S. as an intermediary. And this is a classic power play, basically, in geopolitical terms, at least in the eyes of some people in Europe. And I think that explains some of the ambivalence among people who actually make policy.
Right. I think it's a fact that any time the U.S. gets involved in any, especially a Muslim country, we're radioactive. And people remember the no-fly zone, the 10-year no-fly zone imposed on Iraq, which had disastrous consequences for that country, resulted in a lot of deaths even before we went in there and started shooting people up in the occupation. And I think just the mere idea that the U.S. boots on the ground, of course, they're not going to like that. And I would say that would drive people who might be on the fence right now, seeing which way the wind's blowing, might say, well, we'll just stick with Gaddafi and see how this thing plays out.
I agree with that. There's another aspect to it, too. On the one hand, there's the image of Gaddafi as, a maniac or, whatever, loose cannon. And that's, fairly pervasive, particularly in this country. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, this is a fact. Gaddafi is the only human being that has ever had fighter jets sent out to kill him individually. And he survived that.
Right. And remember his daughter. His daughter was killed in one of those U.S. attacks. Right.
That's right. And some 15 other people too.
And the other thing, we're hearing they're talking about the Arab League might do something. Well, the Arab League is in turmoil right now, but they don't even have a military infrastructure. And then they talk about the African Union. Well, Gaddafi's gone out and said that he's the king of all African kings, and he's given a lot of money to some of those African countries. Some of them are dictatorships, of course. So, this is his natural base of support in Africa, because he likens himself more as an African than he even does, in some respects, an Arab.
Yes, and that's another point of contradiction too, because for a very long time, and even continuing through this, by the way, Gaddafi has done an awful lot to further various movements, anti-dictator movements even in Africa, particularly South Africa. He was largely responsible. Nelson Mandela has expressed that he has a huge debt to Gaddafi because of the role that Gaddafi played during the period of apartheid in South Africa. And so, but another, contradiction that goes on there is that despite all of this, and despite the program that was underway, building the largest airport in Africa, development of an African economy, these are things that Gaddafi stated he wanted to start using their oil revenues for, and, made some material moves. On the other hand, they started doing joint maneuvers with AFRICOM.
Absolutely. And let's face it, they were also part of the CIA's rendition and torture program, just like Egypt was. Libya was a major center for that activity, and his director of intelligence, his name is Musa Kusa. He's his right-hand man and was as much involved with the CIA as Omar Suleiman was as the head of the Egyptian intelligence service.
Which is, and it's a lesson there, by the way, for some of the people in these countries that think if they play ball with the United States, then their position will be safe. Like Saddam Hussein believes, for example.
Right. Or Mubarak.
Right. Mubarak too. But these were people that were on the other side of the fence and were seduced into these relationships, including military and, quasi-military, paramilitary, whatever you want to refer to those rendition relationships as, intelligence level relationships. They don't save them, because once these people get a foothold somewhere, they need to eat the entire loaf. And, if you're on, laying on top of the loaf, you're food too.
Absolutely. And it was interesting to hear Gaddafi talk about how he's under assault from Al-Qaeda, that these people are all Al-Qaeda. It almost sounds like he could be a general in the Pentagon making the same statements.
Or Bush, yep.
Right, with the Bush administration, everything is Al-Qaeda. This guy, apparently Richard Pearl did more than burnish his image over here. He must have convinced them that the Al-Qaeda boogeyman is a good way to go when you're in trouble. We see that with Yemen today. This guy Saleh, that regime is talking about how they're under assault from Al-Qaeda, and apparently they're reporting that Al-Qaeda blew up a bomb today and killed 4 people over there. So, and the Saudis are they're always talking about, and Mubarak referenced Al-Qaeda in his final hours. So it looks like Al-Qaeda is the gift that keeps on giving for a lot of these U.S.-supported dictators, especially in that area. But let's go to the phones. We have Byron. Byron called in the last segment from Canada about Libya. So let's bring Byron on. Byron,
yeah. Hey, sorry for calling back, but there was a statement that some lady called you about the sex trade over in Saudi Arabia, and why I imagine it does happen. Israel is the #1 country in the Middle East that has the largest sex trade of any country over there. The other thing is, you know, before Americans start trying to criticize, and they love running down Muslim countries, and there's no doubt in my mind that the Saudis, there's a lot of corrupt princesses and princes over there. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But before the Americans want to start criticizing any Muslim country about sex trades and drugs and everything else, they need to clean their own damn backyard up. Last week, there was a report that 300,000 children, boys and girls, I think 13 years and younger, around Washington, D.C., was involved in different types of sex shenanigans going on, mainly by the politicians and the very wealthy.
Right. So, I was going to say, that's probably the congressional pages you're talking about.
Yeah, well, all I'm trying to say, for that lady that she thinks she's going to make a point by trying to criticize the Saudis, and there's no doubt there's probably something going on, she needs to look at her own damn backyard instead of worrying about other countries. And I just want to say one other thing. The Libyan people, if any American steps on that soil in Libya, and if they can catch them, they ought to hang them by the neck and gut them. After what they've done to Iraq that was becoming a first world nation, they performed a second heart transplant in the world. And as you said about their education, health care, and everything else in Libya, or in Iraq, sorry, for the United States to go in there and destroy that country, literally, not only killing the men, the professionals, the educated over there, but the destruction of the land with the depleted uranium and everything else that they've dumped in that land. United States, if there's a country that I think needs to be taken to task, United States is right at the top of the list for what they've been doing in these third world countries and around the world for the last 150 years. I apologize for saying that. But it's
no.
American
I think we're in agreement with that. If you look at our history, Don, I mean, it's not just North Africa. Everywhere we've supported some of the worst vile dictators in the world, especially in Latin America.
Well, why are you looking at supporting in the third world? Look who we're getting to run our own, like the people that we got running this country. Look what they've done to it.
Absolutely.
You know, why are you talking about supporting other people? Look what the hell, United States is 42 million people on food stamps, 50 million without any health care. What the hell, what kind of politicians and leaders have we got in the United States here, for God's sakes?
Right,
anyway,
right.
That's all I wanted to say.
Well, I think that, Don, one thing we didn't touch on is how even some of the independent media that used to report this has been sort of taken over. I know you've had some experience with that in New York, and we had Hillary complaining about news coverage. But what are your thoughts on just the fact that this, you know, the last week we heard more about Charlie Sheen and what was going on in Libya?
Yeah, absolutely true. You know, just to go to the sex trade thing for 1 second, you know, I live in New York, and in New York City, you know, periodically there are raids both of Russian women who were impressed into coming to the United States and working as prostitutes, and Chinese and Korean women also, like all the time. So, I mean, and there's more money here available for that, and it's much more above board than it is likely. I mean, I don't know from personal experience, but likely more than it is in, for example, Saudi Arabia. But more to the question of what Hillary had to say about the media here, and you're right. Charlie Sheen was like #1 topic on an awful lot of the news programs over the last couple of weeks. In the Middle East, the listening audience, viewing audience, news sources, Al Jazeera is about 53% of it. That's a 2008 poll I'm looking at. And Al Arabiya, about 9%. And those are the two largest mainstream Arab networks. And then the U.S. has one, Al Hura, which is totally a U.S. intel op.
Yeah, sure.
And so, you know, that's, you know, a good chunk between Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya is 60 some odd % of the population. And like I said, Al Jazeera is particularly visible on Libya, but in general, it's Qatar's perspective, and Al Arabiya is Saudi Arabia's perspective. That's where this, the money comes from to finance these places. Now, Saudi Arabia, of course, is completely and totally aligned with the United States, and in terms of dealing with, for example, both Gaddafi and go back to Saddam Hussein. Both of those countries, Libya and Iraq, had very large public sectors, and you'd term it mixed economies with a large socialist, quote unquote, aspect to it. And that's not exactly where the people that rule Saudi Arabia live in their minds, and it is certainly not a model that they want to see flourish in the Middle East, because an awful lot of the existing paradigm would collapse if that were a successful model there. I think that's why you see people like Chavez and Fidel Castro speaking out maybe a little louder than they would otherwise. And the other thing I wanted to raise, I'm sorry to run on like
this. Yeah, no, go ahead.
The really interesting thing is Hillary Clinton's silence over what took place in Honduras, and their culpability over what took place in Haiti with Aristide, and compare and contrast to the role that they're playing now in Libya, and the role that she played in Iraq and is playing in Afghanistan.
Oh, right. And there was the aborted coup against Rafael Correa in Ecuador, which she had nothing to say about, really. And I think when we look at the animated tree, John Kerry, weighing in. I mean, when you go back to the 1980s, and our last guest was at the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and was forced to give visas to these Saudis who he knew they were coming over here for no good. But this gets back to the whole BCCI, Iran-Contra deal. Kerry was oversight on that. Clinton, when he was governor of Arkansas, allowed all kinds of shenanigans to go on. These people are so intelled up with CIA connections. You can't really believe anything they say, because they've got their own agenda.
Right, and their agenda is oil.
Absolutely, and we will be right back after this short break.